Officer Mark Thompson stood by his patrol car, the sun casting long shadows on the pavement of the small town he had sworn to protect. With a reputation for being tough on crime, he often prided himself on his unwavering approach to law enforcement. Today, however, he was about to face a situation that would challenge everything he believed about justice and fairness. The radio crackled to life, breaking the stillness of the afternoon. Unit 42, we have a report of a theft at the local supermarket. Respond immediately, the dispatcher's voice commanded. Officer Thompson's brow furrowed slightly as he turned on his siren and sped toward the supermarket. His mind raced with the usual assumptions. Another petty crime, likely involving someone from the wrong side of the tracks. As he drove, he replayed in his mind the countless times he had dealt with theft, each incident reinforcing his hardened perspective. He arrived at the supermarket, parking in front of the entrance, and stepped out of the car, adjusting his utility belt with a practiced motion. Inside the store, chaos reigned. A crowd had gathered around the checkout area, their murmurs forming a cacophony of judgment and suspicion. The store manager, a portly man named Mr. Jenkins, was animatedly gesturing toward a young girl standing by the checkout, her wide eyes brimming with fear. Officer Thompson approached, his presence commanding the attention of onlookers. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," Mr. Jenkins exclaimed, his voice laced with urgency. "This girl, she was trying to steal food. I caught her red-handed." As Thompson looked closer, he saw the girl, a 12-year-old black girl with braids and an oversized hoodie. She clutched a small bag of groceries tightly to her chest, her lips trembling as she glanced around at the gathered crowd. The sight pulled at something deep within him, but he quickly dismissed it, focusing instead on the manager. "What happened?" Thompson asked, crossing his arms. "She claimed she was trying to pay for it, but I saw her slip it into her pocket first," Mr. Jenkins replied, his voice rising. "I can't have this kind of behavior in my store. I need you to handle it." "Stay calm, sir," Thompson said tersely, his eyes narrowing as he turned to the girl. "What's your name?" Jasmine Carter," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jasmine, is it?" Thompson's tone was flat. "Tell me what happened here." "I wasn't stealing. I was just trying to buy food for my family," Jasmine pleaded, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "My mom doesn't have enough money, and I thought—" "Thought what?" Thompson interrupted, his voice sharper than intended. "That you could just take what isn't yours? That's not how this works." "But I wasn't," she started, but the officer cut her off again, his mind racing with the implications of her words, yet unwilling to entertain them. "Enough. You're just a kid. You don't know what it means to take responsibility," he said, his gaze hardening. The words came out harsher than he had intended, but the biases he held were firmly rooted within him, guiding his actions. "Officer, please." Jasmine's voice cracked, desperation pouring out of her. "I wasn't stealing. I have the money right here," she said, fumbling in her pocket and pulling out a crumpled $10 bill. Thompson's eyes flicked to the money and back to Jasmine, the wheels of his mind turning. Yet, instead of giving her the benefit of the doubt, he focused on the accusation. The tension in the air thickened as he realized the weight of the situation, the power he held over this frightened child. "Mr. Jenkins, let's review the security footage before jumping to conclusions," Thompson said, although he felt a twinge of discomfort in his gut. But before he could act, the manager shook his head vehemently. "No need for that. She's clearly guilty. We don't need to waste time with excuses," Mr. Jenkins insisted, crossing his arms defiantly. Jasmine stood frozen, her heart racing as she felt the eyes of the crowd on her, their judgment palpable. In that moment, as Officer Thompson prepared to proceed with the interrogation, a small voice inside him whispered that perhaps he was about to make a grave mistake. But as the moment passed, he pushed that voice aside, ready to enforce the law without considering the truth that lay beneath the surface. Jasmine stood trembling in the dimly lit corner of the supermarket, her heart racing as the fluorescent lights flickered overhead. The air was thick with tension, and the murmurs of other customers echoed in her ears, a cacophony she couldn't fully process. Just then, a familiar voice pierced through her fog of fear. "Jasmine, what's going on?" Lisa Carter rushed into the store, her face a mask of worry. She spotted her daughter surrounded by the store manager and Officer Thompson, his imposing figure looming over Jasmine like a dark cloud. "Mom!" Jasmine exclaimed, her voice cracking as she rushed into her mother's embrace. "I didn't steal anything. I was just trying to buy food for us." Lisa's eyes darted to Officer Thompson, who stood with his arms crossed, his expression unyielding. "Officer, please. You have to listen to her. She's just a little girl trying to help her family. She didn't do anything wrong," she implored, desperation lacing her words. "Ma'am, she was caught with groceries she didn't pay for." "It's my job to investigate," Thompson replied, his tone dismissive, yet the hint of a challenge lingered in his voice. He was accustomed to commanding respect, and the urgency of the situation only fueled his need to assert authority. Lisa's voice trembled as she pressed on. "You don't understand. We're struggling." Jasmine was trying to buy food for her younger siblings. "She has no reason to steal." "Struggling or not, it doesn't change the facts," Officer Thompson stated, his eyes narrowing. He turned back to Jasmine, who was now looking down at her worn sneakers, shame washing over her. "What do you have to say for yourself? Were you trying to steal? Because that's what it looks like to me." Jasmine's chest tightened as she fought back tears. "I was going to pay for it," she declared, her voice barely above a whisper. I just didn't have enough money." "And yet, you were caught with the items in your hands," Thompson replied, his voice cold and unyielding. He refused to see beyond the surface, his biases blinding him to the truth that lay beneath Jasmine's fear. "Officer, please," Lisa pleaded, her voice rising in frustration. "You don't know what we go through every day. Jasmine is not a criminal. She's a child who cares for her family." For a fleeting moment, Thompson paused, caught by the raw emotion in Lisa's voice. But his ingrained prejudices clouded his judgment, and he pressed forward with his interrogation. "If you were trying to buy food, why didn't you ask for help?" "Because I didn't want to bother anyone." Jasmine shot back, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I just wanted to do something for my family." The tension in the air thickened, and Lisa stepped forward, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "Jasmine is not a thief. She's a good girl trying to help her siblings. We don't have much, but she was trying to do the right thing." "Doing the right thing doesn't involve stealing," Thompson replied, his voice hardening. "You need to understand that, ma'am. Rules are rules." Lisa shook her head in disbelief, frustration boiling over. "This isn't about rules. This is about a child's desperation. If you can't see that, then you're part of the problem." Jasmine felt the weight of their conversation pressing down on her, the walls of the supermarket closing in. "I'm not a criminal," she cried out, her voice breaking. "I just wanted to help." For a brief moment, Officer Thompson looked at her, really looked. He saw the fear in her eyes, the innocence of her youth juxtaposed against the harsh reality they were facing. But his resolve was deep-rooted, and he quickly steeled himself against the pang of empathy that threatened to surface. "I'm sorry, but I have to do my job," he said, his voice betraying no emotion. As Lisa stepped back, her heart heavy with despair, Jasmine felt the walls closing in tighter. The world felt so unjust, and her mother's words echoed in her mind, "You're not a criminal." But how could she prove that in a world that had already labeled her? "Please," Jasmine whispered, looking up at Officer Thompson with pleading eyes. "I just wanted to buy food for my family." But the officer merely turned away, dismissing her plea as he continued to question her, the shadows of his biases lurking behind every word. David Montgomery sat in his modest office, the afternoon sunlight filtering through the blinds, casting stripes of light across his desk. He had just heard about the incident at the local supermarket involving 12-year-old Jasmine Carter. The news sent a wave of determination through him. He had always wanted to make a difference in the world, and now it seemed fate had handed him an opportunity. He picked up the phone and dialed Lisa Carter's number, his heart pounding slightly as he awaited her response. After a few rings, she answered, her voice shaky but filled with relief upon hearing David's name. "Hello? Is this David? Please, we need help," Lisa said, her tone desperate. "Hi, Lisa. Yes, it's me. I heard about what happened to Jasmine. I want to help. Can we meet? David replied, his voice firm but compassionate. Of course. Please, come to our house. Jasmine, she's scared. We don't know what to do, Lisa replied, her voice cracking with emotion. After hanging up, David grabbed his briefcase and headed out, his mind racing with thoughts about the case. He had been a public defender long enough to know that systemic racism often led to the wrongful persecution of innocent individuals, especially in cases like Jasmine's. When he arrived at the Carter household, he was greeted by Lisa at the door. She looked worn and anxious, her eyes red from crying. "Thank you for coming," she said, ushering him inside. "Thank you for trusting me, Lisa," David replied, taking a seat at the small kitchen table where Jasmine usually did her homework. "I need to understand everything that happened. Can you tell me your side of the story?" Lisa took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she recounted the day's events. Jasmine was just trying to buy groceries for her younger siblings. I was at work, and she went to the store with a little bit of money I could spare. I thought they would be safe there. But then, the manager accused her of stealing. David listened intently, jotting down notes. "And what did Jasmine say when you arrived?" "She was terrified. She kept saying she hadn't stolen anything, that she was just trying to help us. But Officer Thompson, he didn't listen. He just saw her skin color and made up his mind." "Did you see the officer yourself?" David inquired, sensing the deeper implications of Lisa's words. "Yes, he was so harsh with her, like she was a criminal. I tried to explain our situation, but he didn't care. I felt so powerless," Lisa admitted, her voice breaking. David nodded, a fire igniting within him. "We need to gather evidence. I want to see the store's surveillance footage. It might show Jasmine trying to pay for the food." Lisa's eyes widened with hope. "Do you think that will help?" "It could be crucial. If we can prove she was innocent, it could change everything," he said, standing up with renewed purpose. "I'll head to the supermarket now." As David left the Carter home, he felt a weight of responsibility resting on his shoulders. He arrived at the supermarket, where the manager, a stout man with a nervous demeanor, awaited him. The manager's posture was tense, and he avoided eye contact, shifting from foot to foot. "Good afternoon. I'm here to review the surveillance footage related to the incident involving Jasmine Carter," David stated, his tone assertive. The manager hesitated, glancing around as if ensuring no one was listening. We don't usually allow just anyone to see that footage. It's company policy." David frowned, sensing the manager's reluctance was more than just policy. "This is a matter of justice. Jasmine is just a child, and she deserves to be heard. The footage could prove her innocence." "Look, I understand, but I can't just," the manager started, but David interrupted. "Then I'll have to get a subpoena. I'd rather not go that route, but I will if necessary." The words hung heavy in the air. The manager's eyes darted nervously as he weighed his options. "Okay, fine. I'll show you the footage, but you have to promise me this stays between us for now. I don't want any trouble." David nodded, suppressing his frustration. "Just lead the way." As they walked to the back office, David felt the tension in the air thickening. The manager reluctantly pulled up the video on a small monitor, and David leaned closer, his heart racing as he tried to focus on the screen. Meanwhile, Officer Mark Thompson sat in his own small office, a stack of files scattered around him. He was supposed to be reviewing the Jasmine Carter case, but found himself staring blankly at the wall. Doubts began to creep into his mind, gnawing at the edges of his certainty. He remembered Jasmine's frightened face, the way she had insisted she was innocent. "What if?" he muttered to himself, shaking his head in frustration. He had always prided himself on being a tough cop, but now he wondered if he had let his biases cloud his judgment. "Mark," called his partner, Officer Ramirez, entering the office with a coffee cup in hand. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Thompson snapped, but the edge in his voice betrayed his turmoil. "Come on, man. Just admit it. You're having second thoughts about that kid," Ramirez pressed, leaning against the doorframe. Thompson clenched his jaw, the truth stinging like a slap. I need to look into this more. Something doesn't feel right." Good. That's a start, Ramirez said, offering a supportive smile. Just remember, it's not too late to change course. With those words echoing in his mind, Thompson sat back in his chair, staring at the case file. For the first time, he felt the cracks in his rigid worldview begin to widen. In the dim light of the small conference room at the local community center, Lisa leaned forward, her brow furrowed with worry. David sat across from her, the weight of the situation heavy in the air. "We need to prepare for the worst," he said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "This isn't just about Jasmine anymore. It's about exposing the systemic racism that's been festering in this town for years." Lisa nodded, her hands clasped tightly together. "I just want to protect my daughter. She didn't do anything wrong, and yet here we are, fighting for her innocence." Her voice trembled slightly as she recalled the fear in Jasmine's eyes when she had first arrived at the supermarket. David leaned back in his chair, contemplating the best approach. "We need to gather evidence that shows what Jasmine was doing there. We can't just rely on her word against Officer Thompson's reputation." He paused, his mind racing through potential strategies. "If we can find witnesses, people who saw her paying for the groceries, we can build a solid case." "I'll talk to some of the neighbors," Lisa suggested, her determination igniting. "There are a few families who shop there regularly. They might have seen Jasmine." "Good idea," David said, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. "And we should also look into the store's history. Has this manager had any issues before? Any complaints?" Lisa frowned, racking her brain. "I don't know. I just know that he seems more concerned with his image than with what's right. They always do." As the two strategized, outside the community center, the air was thick with tension. Whispers of the incident had spread like wildfire through the town, dividing the community into factions. Some openly supported Officer Thompson, seeing him as a protector of law and order, while others began to question the validity of the accusations against Jasmine. Lisa could feel the weight of those judgments bearing down on her family. In the days leading up to the trial, Jasmine was subjected to the harsh realities of their town's divisions. At school, whispers followed her like shadows. "Is it true she stole?" one classmate asked, casting a wary glance in her direction. Another chimed in, "My dad said she should be in jail." Jasmine felt the sting of their words, each one a reminder of her vulnerability, of the dangers lurking just beyond their front door. On the other side of town, Officer Thompson wrestled with his thoughts. Alone in his dimly lit apartment, he replayed the events surrounding Jasmine's accusation over and over. Each time, a part of him cringed under the weight of his actions. He had always prided himself on being a tough officer, one who upheld the law without question. But now, with the trial looming, he faced an internal battle that threatened to unravel everything he believed in. "Did I do the right thing?" he muttered to himself, staring blankly at the wall. The image of Jasmine's terrified eyes haunted him, and for the first time, he began to question the biases that had shaped his views for so long. His phone buzzed, breaking through the fog of his contemplation. It was a message from a colleague, discussing the upcoming court date, but he felt disconnected from the routine chatter of police work. In the quiet of his apartment, he thought about his own childhood in the same town, where he had watched his father, a police officer himself, handle situations with a heavy hand. The lessons learned were steeped in prejudice, and he had inherited a worldview that felt rigid and unyielding. But now, standing on the precipice of a trial that could change the course of a young girl's life, he felt the cracks forming in that worldview. "Maybe it's time to start listening," he whispered to the empty room, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. The notion frightened him, yet it sparked a flicker of hope. Perhaps there was more to the story than he had ever cared to see. With each passing hour, as the trial approached, he felt the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him like never before. As the community prepared for the trial, with tensions bubbling beneath the surface, both Lisa and David worked tirelessly to support Jasmine, and Officer Thompson found himself at a crossroads, grappling with the consequences of his past actions and the possibility of change. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation as the trial reached its pivotal moment. David stood confidently at the prosecution's table, his eyes scanning the jury as he prepared to present the evidence that would exonerate Jasmine. He cleared his throat, taking a deep breath to steady his nerves. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice steady and clear, "today, we are here not just to determine the innocence or guilt of a 12-year-old girl, but to confront the biases that have tainted this case from the very beginning." He turned to Jasmine, who sat nervously next to her mother, Lisa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. David walked towards the jury box, gesturing to the large screen behind him. "What you see here is the surveillance footage from the supermarket on the day of the alleged theft. It shows Jasmine approaching the checkout counter with her items, attempting to pay. Witnesses will confirm that she was not trying to steal anything. She was merely trying to feed her family." He clicked the remote, and the footage began to play. The jury watched, captivated as Jasmine was seen standing at the register, her small frame dwarfed by the towering checkout counter. Her eyes darted nervously around the store, and she fidgeted with the money in her hands. "Is this the behavior of a thief?" David asked, turning to face the jury. "No, it is the behavior of a child in a desperate situation. A child who, despite the odds stacked against her, was trying to do the right thing." The courtroom murmured with agreement, and David felt a surge of confidence. He turned towards the witness stand, where several shoppers were lined up, ready to testify. "I call my first witness, Ms. Rachel Simmons," he said, motioning for her to take the stand. As Rachel approached, she looked over at Jasmine, giving her an encouraging smile before sitting down. "Ms. Simmons," David began, "can you please tell the court what you witnessed on the day of the incident?" Rachel took a deep breath, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I was in the store that day, and I saw Jasmine at the checkout. She was nervous, yes, but she was trying to pay for her groceries. I even heard the cashier tell her that she needed to hurry up because the line was getting long. Jasmine didn't steal anything. She was just trying to buy food for her family." David nodded, grateful for her testimony. "Thank you, Ms. Simmons." He turned back to the jury. "Here we have a clear account that contradicts the accusations against Jasmine. She is innocent." As the testimonies continued, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Murmurs of support began to ripple through the spectators, many of whom had initially sided with Officer Thompson. David's heart soared as he realized the tide was turning. Next, it was Officer Mark Thompson's turn to take the stand. Standing before the courtroom, he felt the weight of every eye upon him. David approached him, his demeanor calm but insistent. "Officer Thompson, can you recount the events of that day?" Mark cleared his throat, his voice strained. "I received a call about a theft in progress. When I arrived, I found Jasmine at the store." He paused, his brow furrowing as he remembered the fear in Jasmine's eyes. I thought she was guilty based solely on her appearance." David pressed gently. "And did you consider the situation she was in? The context of her actions?" "I didn't," Mark admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I let my biases cloud my judgment. I should have listened to her." The room fell silent as Mark's admission echoed through the courtroom. The realization hit him like a wave. He had treated a child as a criminal without taking the time to understand her circumstances. The guilt began to churn in his stomach, and he could feel the shame rising within him. "You see," David continued, "this case isn't just about Jasmine. It's about the systemic biases that plague our communities. It's about understanding that not all who appear suspicious are guilty. Officer Thompson, do you recognize how your actions that day contributed to this injustice?" Mark's voice trembled as he responded. "Yes, I do. I failed to see Jasmine as a child in need, and I see now how my prejudices shaped my actions." For the first time, he truly looked at Jasmine sitting just a few feet away. The weight of her innocence crashed over him, and he could feel the tears prickling at the corners of his eyes. As the tension in the courtroom escalated, he felt a profound shift within himself. Mark Thompson was no longer just a police officer. He was a man grappling with the consequences of his own biases. The truth hung heavy in the air, and he realized that this moment could be a turning point, not just for Jasmine, but for himself as well. As the courtroom buzzed with tension, Officer Mark Thompson stood at the witness stand, his palms clammy and his heart racing. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Everyone awaited his testimony. Jasmine sat with her mother, Lisa, beside David, their lawyer, who gave her a reassuring nod. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on Thompson, and he could feel the eyes of the spectators piercing through him, filled with both judgment and curiosity. "Officer Thompson," the judge prompted, her voice steady but compassionate, "please recount your actions on the day in question." Thompson cleared his throat, his voice wavering slightly. "I received a call about a theft at the supermarket. Upon arriving, I was informed that a young black girl had been accused of stealing food," he began, his words methodical but laden with an emotional undertow. "I approached the suspect, Jasmine Carter, and I didn't really listen to her. I just saw the accusation and, well, I acted on it." A murmur rippled through the courtroom at his admission. Jasmine's heart raced as she listened intently, searching for any sign of sincerity in Thompson's demeanor. "I was quick to judge," he continued, his voice trembling as he struggled to maintain composure. "I thought I was doing my job, but I let my biases cloud my judgment. I treated her like a criminal without even considering her situation." "Why did you feel that way?" David interjected, his tone firm yet curious. "What was it about Jasmine that led you to assume she was guilty?" Thompson looked down, shame washing over his features. "I guess I was raised in a world where I was taught to see certain people as threats. It's no excuse, but it's the truth." Gasps filled the courtroom as the audience processed his admission. Thompson's voice grew stronger, fueled by a sudden surge of honesty. "I'm ashamed of myself. I should have listened. I should have seen that she was just a child trying to help her family." At that moment, the judge leaned forward, her expression softening. "Thank you for your honesty, Officer Thompson. It's a difficult realization, but recognizing our mistakes is the first step toward change." The tension shifted in the room, and Thompson could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He glanced at Jasmine, her small frame trembling but her eyes fierce with determination. "I want to apologize, Jasmine," he said, his voice cracking. "I treated you unfairly, and I can't take back what I did, but I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me." Jasmine's expression softened, and for a brief moment, the anger she had felt began to dissolve. "It's not about me forgiving you," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's about you understanding that we're not criminals. We're just trying to survive." As Thompson absorbed her words, the judge turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard the testimony. This young girl, Jasmine Carter, has been wrongfully accused. I urge you to consider the evidence presented and the implications of systemic bias in our justice system." After a long deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. The judge's gavel struck the wooden desk, echoing through the room. In the matter of Jasmine Carter, the jury finds the defendant not guilty. The courtroom erupted into an uproar of mixed reactions. Cheers and applause erupted from Jasmine's supporters, while others looked on in disbelief. Jasmine's heart soared, tears streaming down her cheeks as her mother embraced her tightly, whispering words of love and relief. Meanwhile, Thompson felt a mixture of emotions, relief for Jasmine but shame for his past actions. As the crowd began to disperse, he stood up, feeling the weight of his badge pressing down on him. He approached Jasmine, who stood with her mother, still basking in the glow of their victory. "Jasmine," he said quietly, "I want to do better. I want to change. I'm resigning from the force. I need to hold myself accountable and do my part to fight against this kind of injustice." "Thank you," Jasmine said softly, her voice filled with sincerity. "That's all we want, people to see us for who we really are." As Thompson walked away from the courthouse, he felt lighter, yet burdened by the knowledge of the harm he had caused. He was determined to make amends, not just for Jasmine, but for all the lives he had touched with his biases. In the weeks that followed, the truth began to emerge about the supermarket's manager, who had fabricated the theft story to cover his own financial troubles. The news led to his arrest, uncovering a web of deceit that further highlighted the systemic issues within the community. Jasmine and her family, though scarred by the experience, found hope in the new beginning that lay ahead. They were empowered, knowing that they had fought against the odds and won. Their story became a beacon of hope in a town longing for change, reminding everyone that justice could prevail and empathy could bridge even the deepest divides.